Welcome back, Richard. Good morning, and it's good to see you, sir.
Morning. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Doing well. Okay.
The Today's podcast, I think, is really exciting because it's something that we talk about with parents all the time, and something that parents are very concerned about.
Mhm.
That is the relationship between electronics, especially social media, but electronics and cell phones and teen mental health.
Right. And we are all likely going to hear a great deal about this in the next days or weeks because there's a new book that's been published. The author is Jonathan Haidt, and the book is entitled The Anxious Generation. And then the subtitle is How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness. That's the title of the book. It's on the New York Times bestseller list. It's getting a lot of publicity, a lot of press, because most of us believe that cell phones and electronics and social media have caused a change in the way our children do things, how they spend their time, how they spend their free time, battles over cell phones. My daughter is addicted to her phone, all those comments that we hear.
Mhm.
And the point, where he begins his discussion is with the increases, and these are documented increases, and I think everybody agrees, in mental health disorders in teenagers since 2010. And that's the point that he makes. And there are all kinds of data, like 150% increase in US teens who say they have major depression, the increase, 188% increase in emergency room visits for self-harm, rising suicide rates. So the data on the increases are alarming, and they all seem to begin around, all these increases seem to begin around 2010. We
Right.
hear a great deal about, well, the pandemic. No, probably had more to do with the recession of 2008, but something happened around 2010 to at least get our attention as to what it is. So, as a social psychologist, and Haidt is a I think I don't know whether it's Haidt, it's probably Haidt, is a social psychologist, and as a social psychologist, it is his job to try to explain things like this sharp increase in mental illness rates.
Yeah, and just as a sneak peek as to where we're going to go in this podcast, we as psychologists, and Richard, we both have a history with doing research and working at the university level, doing conducting psychological, social, and medical research.
Mhm.
The words that we use are very important, and we're gonna talk about that as we're going through this, because words like cause are very important words that we have to be cautious about. But the other thing is we're going to be talking about this sort of in that backdrop of how in the past couple of decades, maybe even since 2000, um, everything has increased in prevalence. We've done podcasts in the past talking about the significant increase in diagnoses of autism spectrum disorder. Um, nobody relates autistic spectrum disorder to social media use, but there's been a significant increase in that as well. So we're going to talk about that some of these things as we're going through this. But this work that Haidt's doing, and yeah, I don't know if it's Haidt or Height, but it's Haidt. Um, the work that Haidt's doing is really important because when you look at what he's done and surveyed numerous, a multitude of people between the since 2010 or so, he's really looking at some of these trends, and it's really, it takes, you have to be taken aback a little bit by the significant increase in some of these things that's happened over the past couple of decades. It's pretty staggering.
Right. Yeah, the numbers when you get into over 100% increase,
Yeah.
180%, 120%, and some of them are higher than that. Those are alarming statistics. But what he says in the anxious generation, and this is what rings true for many, many parents and teachers. He says, smartphone, and this is from the book, smartphones and the addicting social media apps lured teens away from activities that are indispensable for healthy child development. And he's talking about things like outdoor play, face-to-face conversation with friends, sleep. And then he goes on to say, and it trapped them in a digital realm that saps their self-esteem and attention span and forces them into this high-stakes performance. And then he goes on to say, teenagers' rates of anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide have all skyrocketed as a result. So now what he's saying is, this has happened, this is what social media has caused, and as a result of that, we have these increases in mental illness. Now, I don't think anybody would disagree with the first part of that smartphones and the social media apps drew kids away from other activities. We've talked about that many, many times, right?
Absolutely. And
Right.
it has taken kids from outside and brought them inside. There are many more conversations digitally, virtually than there are face to face. And we've talked about sleep before, but it also, we've talked about the research that suggests that the more that you spend on social media apps, it tends to be the more you report feeling lonely.
Right.
Um,
Mhm.
so people who use social media tend to feel more lonely. They tend to report more depressive symptoms. It zaps their self-esteem and their attention span. And so, yeah, like you said, I don't think anyone disagrees with any of that, that there is this relationship between the use of social media or the use of some of these digital devices and some of these consequences.
Right. And I think he's right that there's some correspondence in 2010 between the introduction of the cell phone and social media. Cell phone was 2007. I think Facebook came out a few years before that, but they all sort of coalesced
Hmm.
at about the same time when we see these increases. Now, I mean, I think we all agree. The problem is, and I know a lot of people say you can do anything you want with research. You can get whatever study. That's not untrue. But we really don't know. There's no clear evidence that the increase was caused by social media.
Right.
We understand that they occurred at about the same time, but there's no real evidence that one caused the other. There's another person who's quoted in these articles. She's an associate dean for research and a professor of psychological science at University of California in Irvine. And she says, the book's repeated suggestion that digital technologies are rewiring our children's brains and causing an epidemic of mental illness is not supported by science. In other words, we don't yet really know the answer to that question. And we have to be cautious when we make statements like cell phones are causing, social media is causing. Um, and then there's this whole question of what does it mean to rewire the brain? Are their brains really being rewired? And we have no idea. I don't know what that means. I know that it's a popular thing to say. I know that it's another way of saying our kids are biologically addicted to these devices, but I'm not sure what rewiring the brain really means. But the issue that we don't disagree with his major points. What we're struggling with is do social media and cell phones and video games, are they the cause of these increases in mental illness?
Yeah, I think that, and that's what I was referring to earlier, that using the word cause, that's a huge word from a research perspective. That is a huge
Mhm.
word to use, because what you're saying is that there is a direct line between A and B, that A makes B happen.
Right.
And you can't there are so few things in the world where you can draw that direct of a line.
Right.
I mean, even with smoking cigarettes, um, you know, we're feeling more confident about saying, that cigarettes can cause cancer, but the word can cause, not will cause.
Right.
There's just a relationship between the two things. There are many people who smoke cigarettes that don't ever develop cancer. So you can't say that smoking cigarettes causes it because there's not that direct line there every time. And it's the same thing with social media. You can't say that social media causes the mental health problems because there are millions of people who use social media who don't have some of these problems. So we just have to be careful. We throw those words out sometimes, especially in popular media. We throw those words out, and it can cause people so much distress, and it can lead to people making massive decisions about things that are based upon, missing information, or as Odger says, it's not really supported by the science to say that they cause something.
That's right. And you'd have to have, when you talk about causation, you'd have to have it across countries.
Right,
You'd have to have it across populations.
right,
This would have to be true in France and Belgium and China and every country in the world where children are fiddling with these things. You'd have to have the same increases. And I'm not sure that you do, but you don't have. So the first point we're making is, wait, let's be cautious. Let's not blame. Let's not say it's causing it. Related, yes.
yes,
Is it causing it? That we're not sure of. The other thing is there really is no research supporting the claim. I mean, and if you want to say something is causing this, you have to be able to document it, you have to be able to show it
right,
repeatedly and predictably. And there was an analysis done and it included 72 countries. So that's a large data set. And it said their conclusion was there's no consistent or measurable association between social media and emotional well-being. As you said, some kids use it and there's never a problem.
well,
The other thing to remember
yeah,
is that when we talk about mental illness, and we mentioned this last week, we're only talking about 20% of the population.
right, right,
100%, presumably, 100% uses devices.
yeah,
It's only 20% who are mentally ill. It should be 100%. It should be everybody who uses them
right,
has a mental illness. Even
right.
if you say 40% with teenagers, it still doesn't account for the other 60%. So there's no research supporting that there's a causal link between these two things.
Right. And and the other piece of this, we did a podcast, well, we've done a number of podcasts over the past few months where we've talked about the growing concern that we especially have with attributing everything to a mental illness. I'm feeling sad, and so I must have major depressive disorder. Well,
Right.
there are lots of things that happen in life that can make us sad, and that's not necessarily major depressive disorder. It could be just, reacting to something that's happening around you. So when we say that, one of the major challenges that I would say that I have with social media is that it makes teenagers, especially kids and teenagers, in constant need for stimulation. They,
Right.
they are constantly swiping, and they need something new to look at, something new to entertain them, something new to strike their and capture their interest. Well, that doesn't mean that they have ADHD. That doesn't mean
Right.
that they have an anxiety disorder or anything like that. It just means that they are growing accustomed to, and we can go back to behaviorism.
Mhm.
Skinner would say they have been conditioned to need something to constantly
Right.
reset their attention.
Right.
Again, that's not a mental illness. And so just because teenagers or kids or whoever are looking at their devices and it's creating this need for constant stimulation doesn't mean that they have a mental illness.
Right.
But we are much more willing, and I say we, meaning as a collective society,
Both are
we are
right.
much more willing to throw out diagnoses for these
Right.
symptoms than we ever have been before.
That's right. And that's the complication here is that is it is it social media or maybe we're just making more diagnoses.
Right.
just generally. I mean, it might be because insurance companies demand it. It might be that parents want a certain diagnosis so they can get the kind of interventions that they believe their child needs.
Right.
It might be that people are going on the internet and looking up symptoms and saying, well, I must have this illness. Okay. There are many other explanations as to explain why rates of mental illness have increased since
Right.
2010, because that's when people had larger access to the internet.
Right.
And it's when we started to um, call things mental illness that may not be mental illness.
Yeah.
So there are competing explanations, but there's another one, and this is one of those chicken and egg problems
Yeah.
when it comes to social media. One of the things we do know is that young people who already have a diagnosis, and we're talking about this 20 or 30% who do, there's evidence that they use these platforms more often and in different ways than their healthy peers.
Right.
They may be going places that cause them to exacerbate an existing condition,
Right.
whereas kids who are just playing video games aren't going to those websites.
Absolutely.
So is it that the social media caused it, or they already had it and then they go into social media and they use it more often and they use it differently? And we
Right.
just simply don't know.
Right. And Richard, I remember we had this first conversation. I can remember it very distinctly that this conversation really got started in the late 90s
Right,
after
exactly.
Columbine,
Mhm.
because everyone
That's
was
true.
saying,
Mhm.
well, those kids, Dylan Klebold and oh,
Harris.
Eric Harris, they did that at Columbine because they played these online games and they
Right,
listened to Marilyn Manson and
right,
they did these things. And so that is why and everybody wanted to attribute that behavior. Because let's be honest, that behavior is really difficult to understand. It is really hard to appreciate why two teenagers would do what they did to their classmates at Columbine High School.
right,
So we look to blame something. And the psychiatrist, we've mentioned him a number of times here on the podcast, Dr. Archie Silver, who I did all of my early training with. I remember him saying that it's not even though he was like in his 90s, you would think if anybody was going to blame technology, I would expect it to be him. But he said, I remember him specifically saying it's not the technology, because in the 1940s and 50s we would have had this like pandemic of bank robbers, because
right,
every movie was about stagecoach robbing and train robbing and bank robbing. We would have had this huge epidemic of robberies like that, and we didn't see that.
right.
Media doesn't create behaviors that aren't already there.
That's
And so,
right.
as you said, we may have a situation where people who already have some mental health conditions or have some mental health worries
Mhm.
are using social media and all in a way that's different than what people who don't have those tendencies are using. And that's why we see some of these problems being exacerbated by social media, with we don't see that in other people.
That's right. So on the one hand, we agree that there's a relationship. I don't think it's we don't know that it's causal. We can't say. We just don't know. But we do know that, and the second point we want to make is mental illness is a complex problem, and there are no simple answers. Okay,
Yeah.
that much we do know. We have this um, we have this phenomenon. Mental illness is a combination of genetic and environmental factors. Very complex. It's going to take a long time to unravel this, and it's going to take a long time to unravel as to why there was this sudden increase. But to jump to one issue, to jump to cell phones and social media, the problem is we could miss what's really going on, and
Right.
that would be the tragedy. The
Right.
other part of this podcast that we want to talk about is, yeah, we all agree with what Haidt is saying here, and we know that there's some kind of an association, and we know that a lot of the stuff is not good for kids. But when we talk about mental illness, we have to be very careful that we treat it with the respect that it's due. And to
Mhm.
jump to one explanation and say this is what's causing it, you're likely to miss what's really going on.
Right, because we can make similar relationships between what's happening in schools to the increase in mental health problems,
Right.
as it relates to some of those needs. And I think
Mhm.
you pointed out at the beginning of the podcast a very good point that I had not thought of, and that was that 2010 comes right at the tail end of the 2008 you know drop, the
Right.
recession and
Right.
all of the crash that happened, which significantly increases distress in society in general. And so, yeah, we can't focus on one thing so much that we stop looking at other potential causes.
Yeah, we did that with the pandemic. Oh, it was
Yeah.
a pandemic, and it was a no. There were other things. There are always other things going on. So where does this leave us? So we know that we have a generation in crisis, and we talk about that all the time. The rates are increasing, and we need to do the best that we can. So, but saying that there is no connection, to say that there is no relationship is probably too extreme. To say that it's a causal relationship is too extreme.
Right.
There's a lot of territory between those two
Right.
extremes of saying it's causal and there are no connection. There, number one, there's a common sense element to the use of tech. I call it common sense element. You don't have 5 or 6 hours a day to play video. I'm sorry. You simply don't have that much time to
Right.
play video games. Okay.
And kids don't understand that. So I was talking to a kid yesterday, a middle schooler, and he is so frustrated because his parents, when he gets home from school, his parents will make him get off his games after 2 hours.
Mhm.
Like, buddy, 2 hours on a game right when you get home from school. Like, you have so many other things that you need to be doing.
Right.
2 hours of doing anything is
Mhm.
going to be a problem.
Right. Yeah. So that's problem number one is that, taking vitamins for 5 hours a day isn't good for you either. So it
Right.
doesn't matter what the activity is. You wouldn't go running for 5 hours a
Right. I was
day.
going to say exercise. You can't exercise for 5 hours a day.
So no, you don't have time. Second, are you are what are you modeling as a parent? You complain about this stuff, but we talk to kids. I mean, look, you're on your devices too. I mean, we are all distracted by these things. So are you modeling the behavior that you're trying to limit? You're trying to say, don't spend 2 hours, don't spend 5 hours. Or are you on your phone? Are you on your devices? Do what I say, not what I do.
Right.
Second, parenting still is a full-time job. Maybe it's more of a full-time job today than it was a generation and certainly 2 generations ago. These devices keep kids occupied.
Right.
And that's the good part. We did learn that during the pandemic, is it kept the kids in their bedrooms and quiet, kept them occupied. Okay.
Right. Well, there's also a lot of good things that can come from social media. I mean, you can learn a lot
Yeah.
from some of these
Mhm.
devices, media outlets.
Right. And so, but they keep, so we don't, so that we can do what we want to do. So the kids are in their rooms and they're occupied
Right.
so that we can cook or clean or play Candy Crush or whatever we're doing. But it may actually require being a parent today because of social media may actually require more time
Right.
than it did when I was growing up. My mother opened the door, we ran outside, and we came back 7 or 8 hours later to eat. She didn't have to worry about us. We were in the neighborhood. We kept ourselves occupied. Today, that doesn't happen. So parents are going to have to be much more cognizant of what their kids are doing.
Right.
Okay.
Now, and I think that the something else we've talked about that I think is probably one of the most critical pieces to this is that kids need to be doing more than just school.
Man.
One of the things we've said on the podcast multiple times now over the past couple of years is that something that the pandemic taught us is that kids and teachers, but most of us learned that school doesn't take 7.5 hours a day. Now,
Right.
there's a lot of things that happen at school that ventures outside of
Mhm.
academics.
Mhm.
I totally get that. And I think that all of those things are really important. So kids spending 7.5 hours a day at school is fine with me because they get a lot of social stuff there. They get a lot of other things there. But kids need more to do than just that. You know, they need to have chores. They need to have other responsibilities. Even if that responsibility is helping with cooking dinner or setting the table or cleaning their room or just being present in the family.
Mhm.
They need to have other things besides just school, because if school is just 7.5 hours a day, what happens to the other 8 hours that you're awake?
Right. You know, one of the most heartbreaking things I hear parents say is, no, your only job is to go to school. That's your job. You just go to school and do well. That is a deal with the devil for two reasons. Number one, if you say all you have to do at school, that means you're going to be doing everything else. Parents are going to be doing everything else. Kids need more than school. They need to learn many more skills than they're learning in textbooks and websites. They must learn other skills, and they cannot get this notion in their head that all I have to do is school, because that's exactly what they'll do.
Right,
They will take you up on that. And they'll say, okay, that's all I'm going to do.
right,
Well, my free time is going to be spent doing the things that I want to do.
right,
If you don't impose that on them, it's not going to happen. If you don't take control of your house, homework isn't enough.
right,
You can't ask the school to give the kids homework so that they're occupied.
right,
That's not the school's job, is to keep your kids occupied after school hours.
right.
Second, household tasks are everyone's responsibilities, not just the mothers or the dads. Um, Everybody should be participating in that. And there are many, many children who grow up and have no responsibility at all for anything except doing their homework. Okay.
Absolutely.
And chores are not just chores. It's not just time. Chores are the way to train your children to learn how to do things and to take responsibility for something more than themselves.
Right.
These are teaching opportunities. They're not just chores. They certainly shouldn't get paid to do them. They
Ab-
they should be contributing to the welfare of the house. Why should it be the mother's job to do all that? Everybody lives there, everybody eats, everybody should be participating.
Absolutely. And this kind of goes back to what you said a minute ago, that maybe because of social media, parenting takes a little bit more time. You know, if social media is taking the kids away from family time, then you need to take that time back. If it's taking away from other playtime, then parents, we need to take that time back. I always laugh when I'm talking with a parent and they say, well, he needs to be doing something else besides being on his phone or being on his video games or on social media. I don't
Mhm.
disagree.
Right.
Um, but the kid will say, I don't have anything else to do.
That's
And
all I do at school.
so you say, well, you ask the parent, you say, well, what else would you like him to do? What else would you want him to be doing other than being on the video games and social media? Well, he needs to find something. Okay, like what would you like for him to find to do? Well, he needs to go out. Okay, I mean it's 150 degrees outside and there's no other kids outside and he doesn't have a bicycle and these are stories that we get from kids. What do you want him to do outside? There's nothing for him to do. Now, at some level, yes, we need to let kids be adventurous and they need to find some things for themselves to do. But as parents, we also have to kind of set the stage a little bit. We can't say go outside and play, but not offer anything outside for them to do. They're not going to, that's how kids get in trouble, because they go
Right.
outside. Oh, I'm gonna go into that abandoned house because I don't have anything else to do. You don't want that kind of thing to happen. So
Right.
as parents, we have to provide those opportunities. And yes, you have Legos, you have books, you have blocks, you have, the science experiment, you have all these different things that you could be doing. So go do something else besides being on electronics.
Right.
Now they have options and they can figure out what to do, but we have
Right.
to set the stage for that.
Right. That's what I said. That's what I meant when I said, you have to be more engaged with your
Yeah,
children in this generation, because you might have to provide the circumstances for them to do those other activities. They are going to go to electronics by default,
sure.
and it's going to be your responsibility as a parent to create the circumstances for them to do other things. You might have to put an art room in your house or something, or an activities room instead of a TV room. I don't know. But I know that parents are going to have to spend more time working to create a schedule and responsibilities so the kids are not just going to school and being on their devices.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in short, we have to be parents. We have to do the work to, make sure that our kids have things to do other than being on social media, and then we can help regulate that a little bit. But at the same time, back away from this idea that social media is the direct cause of some
Right.
of these woes that we're seeing. You know, there is a complex interplay between lots of different things. Social media is and electronics, yes, that's absolutely one of the
Mhm.
factors, but there are a lot of other factors that are involved, and so we need to keep our eyes open and keep our ears to the ground, as they say, to see what else
Yeah.
is out there that's causing some of these problems.
Yeah, because everybody's using it, but not everybody has a mental illness. So there is no, it's not a direct link. So be careful, manage your children, make sure they're not getting into trouble, but do the other things that you need to do to have healthy children.
Absolutely. All right, that is it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.